Foie gras, black caviar, or pizza? What would you choose if it were your last meal? I'll show you the food that the most ruthless and dangerous criminals sentenced to death have chosen, from a single olive to quite audacious and bizarre requests that led to the cancellation of the last meal in some US states. And in the end, I'll show you the choice of Ted Bundy, a rapist and murderer who once preferred human flesh. As I mentioned, there is a long-standing practice in American correctional facilities where death row inmates are allowed to choose their last meal. This custom varies from state to state, giving inmates the opportunity to enjoy their favorite dishes before their execution. However, this tradition was interrupted in Texas in 2011 after an incident involving Lawrence Russell Brewer, who abused this right. Brewer, convicted of the murder of an African American and a supporter of white supremacist ideology, ordered an overly lavish last meal. What was on it? A whole list including fried okra, chicken steaks, cheese omelets, and many other dishes. But Brewer ultimately refused it, stating that he wasn't hungry. This audacity caused outrage and led to the cancellation of the choice of the last meal for all death row inmates in the state of Texas. And here arises a logical question. Can everything be ordered? Actually, no. In the USA, to manage death row inmates' requests regarding their last meal and avoid excessively unusual and expensive orders, special rules have been introduced in various states. For example, since the late 90s, most states have banned alcoholic beverages from being included in the last meal. In Florida, inmates are allowed to order food only from local stores with the total amount not exceeding $40. And in Louisiana, an even stricter limit is set. The cost of the last meal cannot exceed $15. These measures are designed to ensure a certain order and reasonableness in carrying out this tradition, reducing the burden on the budget and preventing potential abuses. Moreover, in most states, there is the possibility to slightly modify the inmate's request, meaning that the last meal wish remains a wish, not a strict list of products. But let's move on to our criminals. And I'll start with a woman. Teresa Wilson Bean Lewis was convicted of killing her husband and stepson in hopes of collecting a $250,000 life insurance policy. She became the only woman in Virginia awaiting execution and was executed in 2010. On the eve of her execution, Lewis chose fried chicken, sweet peas with butter, Dr. Pepper, and apple pie for dessert as her last meal. During the lethal injection, she apologized to her stepdaughter Kathy, expressing remorse for the pain and loss caused. Not too fancy, huh? Well, I'm just getting started. Philip Ray Workman was convicted of killing a police officer, but his case was contentious due to witnesses indicating his innocence. However, the defense arguments were not heard. In 2007, he was sentenced to death in Tennessee. Unlike many who choose their last meal based on personal preferences, Workman did something different. He requested a large vegetarian pizza and asked it to be given to the first homeless person encountered from the pizzeria. How sweet! After the refusal of the prison staff to fulfill his request, Workman began a hunger strike. Eventually, his wish was fulfilled by outsiders who learned about his last will and decided to fulfill it. Peter Kürten was a serial killer responsible for no less than 9 confirmed murders and admitting to dozens of crimes in Dusseldorf. He chose a fairly simple and classic set for his last meal: Wiener Schnitzel with fried potatoes and a glass of white drink. Despite the scale and cruelty of his crimes, his last request was granted before the execution. In 1986, Jonathan Nobles committed a double murder for which he was subsequently sentenced to death. During his time in prison, he turned to faith, becoming a devout Christian, often praying and turning to God. Prior to his execution, Nobles chose a last meal that corresponded to his spiritual aspirations: bread and drink, which was meant to symbolize communion. After this rite, he was given a lethal injection. As for his fate after his death, it will remain between him and God, whether he was forgiven for his crimes. But some inmates really surprised me. James Smith, who requested dirt as his last meal, faced refusal from the prison administration, who speculated that he might use it for a voodoo ritual. They believed it could unexpectedly influence the staff or other inmates. In response to this, the disappointed inmate asked for a jar of plain yogurt instead of dirt, and this time his request was granted. Robbie Lee Garner, convicted of a series of serious crimes in 1985, initially received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Not accepting the verdict, he caused a scandal in the courtroom, subsequently diagnosed with dissociative personality disorder. After several attacks on other inmates, his sentence was reconsidered and replaced with the death penalty. Spending a quarter of a century behind bars, Garner had enough time to think about his last meal. He chose a rich and elaborate set: a large lobster cooked with aromatic spices and herbs, as well well as a huge steak. Dessert consisted of pistachio ice cream with chocolate shavings and apple pie. Additionally, Garner expressed a desire to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy during dinner, which was making a lot of noise in the cinema at that time. Amazing, isn't it? But these are not the most unusual whims that inmates had. Ray Rector was convicted of killing a police officer and another person at a nightclub. After committing the crime, Rector attempted suicide by shooting himself in the head, which resulted in serious brain damage, but his life was saved by medics. Prior to his execution, Rector chose steak, chicken, cherry soda, and pecan pie for his last meal. Interestingly, Rector did not eat the pie, stating that he would save it for later. This may indicate his lack of understanding of the finality of his impending execution due to his brain condition after the failed suicide attempt. But not everyone eagerly chooses their last menu. For example, Troy Davis, convicted of killing a police officer and sentenced to death by lethal injection, refused the traditional last meal. His decision not to order food was motivated by a reluctance to acknowledge this meal as his last, unlike the previous case. It was a clear and conscious decision. After all, it's hard to believe that tomorrow you won't be here anymore. Remember I mentioned that they can adjust the request in prison? Here's where a real scandal happened. Thomas Grasso, a housebreaker convicted of killing 2 elderly people during robberies, chose an extensive and varied assortment of dishes for his last meal. His order included braised clams, mussels, fried ribs, a cheeseburger, fresh strawberries, pumpkin pies, milkshakes, and spaghetti from a specific manufacturer, SpaghettiOs. However, the prison didn't bother with this detail and served regular spaghetti. Grasso was furious, overturned the plate, and threw himself against the walls. This misunderstanding became the subject of his last words, where he expressed a desire for the press to learn about this incident, emphasizing the importance of details. After all, for him, it was insanely important. In 1980, Miguel Richardson was convicted of crimes against 2 guards and sentenced to death by shooting in Texas. For his last meal, he chose an unusual and symbolic set of dishes. He ordered a celebratory cake adorned with the date of his wedding and a family of pink candles. What did it mean? The man didn't explain. Also included in his order were various fruits and a salad dressed with Thousand Island sauce. Richardson tried to arrange a final party, while the next death row inmate was much less cheerful. Delbert Junior was convicted of robbery and murder in April 1985 and subsequently sentenced to death in Texas. Initially, he didn't want to order anything for his last meal, but his mother persuaded him to eat, offering him a cheeseburger. Kind, isn't it? And sad. In 1962, before his execution, German officer and Gestapo member Adolf Eichmann, directly responsible for the deaths of many Jews, requested a bottle of 2 drinks. Was it a mockery or sincere love for this drink? Will remain a mystery. If you think It is just a horror movie for kids, you're seriously mistaken. The clown Pennywise has its prototype in the person of John Wayne Gacy. He was a successful businessman and philanthropist, occasionally transforming into a clown at children's parties. Gacy easily changed his masks and makeup to conceal his true nature. Neither his own wife nor the wife of the US President Jimmy Carter suspected his dark sides. Gacy lured victims to his home, treated them to alcohol and offered marijuana, and then coerced them into games. If someone refused, he turned into a clown and performed tricks, including a handcuff routine. He put them on himself and easily took them off, then offered the victim to do the same. When they found themselves trapped, the clown Pogo would taunt and assault them. The remains of his victims, 33 young people including several teenagers, were hidden between the walls of his house, in the floor, and sometimes thrown into the nearby river. This American serial killer, before his execution, offered fried shrimp, french fries, strawberries, and a pack of KFC chicken nuggets for his last meal. Not so sophisticated for someone with such imagination. Clarence Ray Allen became a historical record holder in terms of age among those sentenced to death in the state of California. Spending many years behind bars, he lost his sight and hearing, which made him practically incapacitated. The defendant's advocates argue that he currently poses no threat to society. They insisted that executing him would be unjust as the purpose of punishment is absent and carrying out the sentence would be extremely cruel. However, the plea for clemency from the lawyers was rejected by the state governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. This case became the last in the history of the state when a death penalty was carried out. Before departing from this world, the convict ordered his last meal, fried chicken, juicy steak, and ice cream with added black walnuts. Sounds appetizing, but there were cases in history when food was ordered not for its intended purpose. Robert Buell stood out significantly compared to the other convicts on my list. He didn't want to overeat before his execution as many did. His last wish was an olive with a pit. Why? Did he simply love the taste of olives? After Robert's execution, prison guards reported that he asked to be buried with this pit. What a strange request. He had an unfathomable dream to be reborn as a tree. However, it never grew. And what do terrorists order for themselves? The organizer of the most massive terrorist attack in American history, the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995, which claimed the lives of 168 people, including 19 children under the age of 6, was sentenced to death by lethal injection in the state of Indiana. For his last meal, he requested only mint chocolate chip ice cream with chocolate sprinkles. How modest and unassuming, right? Gerald Mitchell, a 33-year-old African-American who was executed in a Texas prison. He was convicted of the murder of 20-year-old Charles Marino in 1985 when he was only 17 years old. The conflict between them arose over drugs. Mitchell's sentence was carried out by lethal injection. He claimed that he was prejudiced because of his race, as the jury consisted only of white jurors. Mitchell repeatedly tried to appeal his sentence, arguing that he was only convicted because of the color of his skin. His last wish before his execution was a pack of candies. Here's another serial rapist and murderer, William Bonin. Together with his accomplices, he killed between 21 and 36 boys and young men. Before that, he tortured and subjected them to assault. Horrible, isn't it? Before his execution, he demanded 2 huge pizzas with sausage, cheese, sun-dried tomatoes, and mushrooms. After he stuffed himself, William Bonin treated himself to a serving of chocolate ice cream and drank a whopping 18 cans of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. How did such a quantity of food and drinks fit into one man during one sitting remains a mystery. Ted Bundy is one of the most notorious serial killers in the United States. He employed a special method to persuade girls to get into his car. In bad weather, he would wait for them at the bus stop, where the bus was delayed, and offer them a ride home. Thanks to his appearance and charm, he rarely faced refusals. The girls saw a well-groomed and charming man from whom you definitely wouldn't expect any harm. Once they were in his car, getting out was impossible. Ted simply removed the door handle on the passenger side. This way, Bundy would take the girls, assault, and kill them. Moreover, according to forensic experts, the man often amused himself with the already dead bodies. And at home, remnants of cooked human flesh were found. Horrifying, isn't it? But what did such a monster decide to eat for his last meal? Before his execution, confessing to 30 murders, Ted was served a regular dinner consisting of steak, eggs, toast, potato pancakes, milk, coffee, and juice, which he refused to eat, and he died on an empty stomach without any remorse. As you can understand, although people can be terrible, their taste is quite ordinary. And that's all. Thank you for watching.